Hi, everyone, and welcome to the CXPA sponsored webinar by Thematic about proving the ROI of CX and how Greyhound used customer feedback to get buy-in and increase their NPS by 20 points. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Molly Perrin, and I am a Membership Community Manager with the CXPA. This webinar will be recorded and made available in the CX Toolbox within the Public Resources section of the CXPA website. And for our CCXP certified attendees, this webinar is CEU eligible and will be recorded in your account within 1 week. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. First, we have Matt Schoolfield, who is the Manager of Customer Insights and Commercial Analytics at Greyhound. His team is responsible for the insights into all customer and marketing data at Greyhound. We'll also have Alyona Medelyan, who is the CEO of Thematic. And as I mentioned, Thematic is the sponsor of today's webinar. Thematic is an AI-driven customer insight solution that aims to improve CX through insights from customer feedback. And we also have Stephen Platt on the line, who is the Marketing Director at Thematic. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, don't hesitate to submit them via the chat box on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will post the answers along with the recording on our website for any questions that we don't get to, but I think we'll be able to handle some questions throughout the presentation today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Stephen to get us started.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining. We're really looking forward to this conversation. We've got a brief kind of overview here of what we'll be doing. So it's been a really just profound pleasure to work with Matt over the past few years. And see what he's been able to accomplish, both with our platform and with his skills. And we're hoping that you all enjoy, learning from that. So what we'll be doing today is going into sort of the high level before and after. Really, what was it that Matt came into when he started at Greyhound? What was the situation with the customer experience there, and what was he able to accomplish? And then we'll look at some keys that emerged and the strategies that Matt used. We'll have some time after that for takeaways and questions. A couple quick housekeeping things. So we do want to keep this conversational. And for that reason, we don't really have a product demo or anything in this. I kind of fold in the technology slides really throughout. And then you can send questions at any time. We may not be able to address them right away if they're not kind of in the flow, but we will definitely try, and anything that can't be addressed right away, we have time at the end. So if anything pops up at any point, drop in a question and we'll try to incorporate that. So with that in mind, Matt, I'd love to, if you could just give a basic overview kind of the Greyhound business. Maybe I think a lot of us are familiar with Greyhound. I've certainly ridden them many times in my life. But I would love to hear kind of the overview of kind of the business and the situation with customer experience that you came into.
Absolutely, Stephen. So first of all, Greyhound, everybody generally knows the name. We've been around since 1913, so over 100 years old. We provide bus transportation across the United States as well as Canada and a little bit of Mexico. But here's a few things that a lot of people don't know about us. We actually service 250,000 origins and destinations throughout our system. It's the largest travel network in the world by a single carrier, and we service over 20 million customers per year. So it's a big network, a lot of people rely on Greyhound, and it's a pretty exciting business to be a part of, especially today when we're competing against not only airlines, but people's own cars, their own transportation, as well as things such as Uber, etc. So as far as coming into Greyhound, I started here in 2016. When I came into Greyhound, our post-trip survey, which is a survey that we send out to every customer once they've completed their trip, it was really long, 35, 40 minutes to complete if you were to hit everything. A lot of questions, things such as, do you have a credit card? Did you stay at a hotel on this trip? And so forth. A lot of things that were just really not pertinent and not valuable that extended that survey out for a long period of time. Came into that. We also came into a situation where our station managers, our regional operational VPs, they were hungry for data. They wanted to understand, what did customers have to say about their trip? How was their experience and so forth. So we kind of started with bare bones at that piece. And we pushed through, and the first thing we said was, this survey is way too long. We cannot ask all of our customers 32 questions, take up a ton of time, and expect to get valuable answers back. So the first thing we did, we went out and looked for an analytics tool that would help us understand what we were getting in comment boxes. We find comment boxes to be extremely valuable. We needed to understand a way to measure those without having to individually read every single survey that comes in. We get around 20 to 30,000 surveys a month. Of those, about half have a comment box inside, so it was important to understand that. So the first place we did was we reached out to Thematic. We ended up doing a 3-month trial, and as part of that, we took our survey from 32 questions down to 5 questions. Those questions were, where did you start? Where did you finish? How likely are you to recommend us to friends and family? And an open text box at the end, essentially. We jumped immediately from a 68% completion rate to a 94% completion rate, which was huge right off the bat. So we had a ton of insight available. We had a ton of just value immediately, and we had a ton more folks filling the survey out, which was exactly what we wanted to see. The other piece from this that was so valuable was, like I mentioned, those station managers and VPs that were so hungry for data. If they were going to manually read that stuff, a station like New York, for example, one of our busiest stations, they might spend 3 hours on a Friday trying to dig through their, 300 to 400 surveys they received over a period of a week to understand what each customer had to say, what the themes are inside of that, and what kind of topics were coming up frequently. With the dashboards inside of Thematic, that took that 3 hours down to 3 minutes. It gave them a quick overview of customers are specifically mentioning whether it be issues with on-time performance or with terminal cleanliness, something around that. It really freed up a lot of time for our station managers to do what they need to do, which is be in the terminal and work to improve our product. So it's been a lot of work over 2.5 years, but we headed down that road now that we've been with Thematic for about 2 years. And our big focus really, once we got them kind of in the door and set, was how do we get buy-in, from everyone here at the company? Yeah, we have these insights, we understand them, but what are we using them for other than just telling station managers how to fix things? So the next piece of that journey was really walking through kind of how can we get value from finance and from accounting and from the operational team and commercial team to all understand that, what our customers telling us are valuable.
Right. So I love the arc of this story. The way that when you joined, you had a lot of data coming in, but it wasn't the right information. It wasn't accessible to people on the front line who could use it. And, I think the quote that emerged when we were talking before, Matt, was you had people on your executive team who really believed that only angry customers give feedback and that there's a limited amount of value to that, which is something that, but
I was going to say, that's absolutely right. That's a great point you bring up. One of our biggest battles right off the bat was, we had folks in our executive suite that thought that the only people that filled out a survey were people who were unhappy with the product. So immediately there was a negative connotation to the data we were receiving. They were saying it's only unhappy customers that are filling this out. They're scoring us poorly because they're frustrated and they're not going to treat anything fairly because they're so frustrated with their experience. So, we had to go through and kind of fight that battle, which the first piece was, actually from our net promoter score question, we get more 10s than we do 0s. So more people are happy to promote our product than they are completely frustrated with it. So that helped him understand immediately that, look, everybody's filling this out. People love to tell us what they think. And we've been really lucky to have a group of passengers and customers who are very vocal and they want to tell us about the company. They want to tell us what we can do better, but they also want to tell us what we're doing well and how we can improve.
So this is a really great before and after, and I think one that a lot of CX folks would envy significantly. So you not only managed to begin getting feedback into the hands of people who can take action on it, which we'll get into later, but you've also focused the executive team on what the customers are saying, and not just in the sense of hey, people are angry or there's this big reaction or we're trying to make a big splash, but you really, as we'll go into later, have managed to get the board focused on what the customer is saying in an ongoing basis. Can you just speak a little bit to just your when you joined Greyhound, what kind of role were you in? What was the arc of your career, and what are you doing there now?
Yeah, absolutely. When I came into Greyhound, I started here as a customer insights analyst. So my job was basically to manage our survey, manage the responses, and make sure that we got those responses into the hands of the right people. It was just me responsible for all the analysis for all the surveys we received all year long. And that is outside of post-trip as well. That could be things like post-purchase or demographic surveys, anything and everything. I was responsible for all of it. And for a company who's serving 20 million customers a year, that's a lot of data. So you can imagine how tight my time was. To be able to have time to really analyze and dig in deep into data is something that I really lacked at the time. From there, I realized immediately, that's when I said, we need to find a way to shorten this survey to get more responses, but also find a tool that can summarize those responses for us and create value. Thematic helped with that. We jumped into that piece. From there, we started growing the tool, and about 8 months ago, actually, I got buy-in from our chief commercial officer. I was able to start my own team. Now I manage all of our commercial analytics and our customer insights group. So it's been kind of a process of getting everyone's buy-in on data from our customers is important. That data does provide revenue dollars. And that's something that we need to look at monthly to help them understand what we're doing. Other big piece was just that NPS increase over time, right? While I'm doing all these things, improving, how we're asking these questions, it was watching our operations teams utilize the data we were providing in a much simpler manner and to provide change at our stations. That 20-point NPS increase was huge. And that was around things where folks were finding out stuff that they just didn't know before. One example I always give with Dallas, Dallas started seeing scores come in. People were talking about poor terminal cleanliness scores. And they realized that it was during a specific part of the time of the day. And what they realized was, sure enough, it was the 1 hour that they had given as a break for their cleaning staff inside. That was actually one of the busiest parts of the day. So folks were coming through, trash was on the floor, things like that. And it took a little bit longer than normal to pick it up. They were able to see that through the survey. They were able to adjust their scheduling. The NPS for that specific station jumped up about 8 points almost immediately. So a ton of value there. And it was just, watching this change grow and understand how that we understand these metrics to really build Greyhound to be a better customer-friendly service.
Love it. No, I love every time that Matt and I talk, I hear new things that he's doing, and really want to focus. It's not so much on the kind of AI. Obviously, we add some value, and there are things that are really difficult for an analytics team to do that Thematic can make really easy. And we'll talk about those things. But what we're really interested in, I think, is what have you done, with the tools and the resources that you've been able to secure with these wins. And as we spoke, prior to this call, some of the themes that we'll be building the rest of this webinar around, that I've kind of, as a marketer, extracted from what you've done, are on this slide. So a quick overview, and we'll dig into each one of these, of some of the principles that we've really seen work, at Greyhound and at other customers over the years, is first letting customers talk. And this really refers to the way that you ask a question, whether it's in a conversation or whether it's in a survey, can either obstruct and hide, or it can really surface what is really important to that person. So we'll talk a little bit about how you've done that with your survey design. The next is paying attention. A lot of people just expect that their customer feedback is going to go into some box and never be looked at, especially when it's given to a big company. So you've done some great things both with your teams and with the technology you've brought in to make sure that you are able to listen effectively at scale and figure out what matters to customers. So we'll dig into that. I love this idea of a beachhead metric. So you've invested really heavily in showing the rest of the organization what is why NPS and why different customer metrics matter. That's ultimately allowed you to really speak the stakeholders' language. So you're delivering insights that matter to your stakeholders. And then the last piece, which I think is really interesting, is how you've played the long game. You've found quick wins, but you've really built a regular, ongoing cadence with your stakeholders. and that's allowed, for them to respond, them to, give buy-in to what you've done. So we'll be going through each of these now, and I think the first one is letting customers talk. You mentioned the stats already. So, you went from a 32-question survey to a 5-question survey, incredible completion rate increase. Let's talk a little bit about this combination of ratings and open-ended questions. What kind of questions are you asking, and how do you combine open-ended feedback with these ratings?
Yeah, great question. Like I said, the first piece was we had to shorten this thing down. It was just significantly too long. But the other piece where we found value was just hearing what your customers have to say. Our open-ended question today is, tell us a little bit more about your journey with Greyhound. That gives people an opportunity to either vent about their trip or to talk about a great driver or a great terminal employee that they worked with, whatever it may be. What we found through that is that through those open text boxes, we're able to identify areas that we didn't realize were problems or concerns to our customers prior to this analytics we're doing with Thematic. When we had that 32-question survey, it was all about, rate your terminal employee, rate your driver. Did you have bags? Were they picked up on time? Everything was very specific and very pointed, to the point where we were almost directing customers down a path to answer certain questions, when in actuality we were missing some of the bigger things that we could have identified at the time. So that was huge for us to be able to kind of, let customers tell us what they enjoyed and what they didn't enjoy. It might have been something we're not thinking about at all. And the other piece too, that we love about a 5-question survey, we're now then able to add more kind of project-focused or short-term questions to the survey to understand additional about our customers that we weren't before, because it would have made it just too long. Now then we can take the survey from 5 questions to 7 questions. Maybe we've added 2 questions about terminal monitors and what we're displaying on there. We want to find out some information around that. We can add those to the survey. We're guaranteed we're going to get a great completion rate still, because it's still very short. And we've answered 2 questions around a project that we're currently working on. Or maybe it's a question around bus condition, or it's a question around terminal seating, whatever it may be. This allows us to continue to push these questions out to large amounts of people without having to ask 14 different ways essentially the same thing. And one thing I always want to be clear with this piece as well is that this does not replace the long analytics. We send out longer surveys throughout the year. We do some stuff around demographics that's 18, 20 questions, things like that. Our key here really was this post trip that goes to everyone. We want to keep it short, simple, and make it customer friendly for our customers to want to tell us what's going on. And that's where the 5 questions really came into play.
It's really funny. I think a lot of customer experience people should really make sure they're taking their own surveys.
Yeah.
We were at a restaurant recently for some business travel, and Alyona actually videotaped me going on a rant. We decided to fill out the question on the receipt, log on to the iPhone. It was really interesting. I'm eating food. We're having an experience here. There's plenty of things that are probably emergent to me. I loved interacting, with the person who was there, and before I could even share anything that was happening for me, I'm literally like filling out taxes. They're asking questions that were so specific, that I didn't even know how to think about. Some of them weren't even relevant because I hadn't completed that part of the experience yet. So
you're absolutely right, Stephen. And that's one of the things as well with that 32-question survey. I bet you can guess where the open-ended text box was. It was question 32. So folks were having to trudge through 31 questions to get there, which meant you had a smaller completion rate of that question. And also they would get so bored or frustrated through it all that they would just start marking answers without paying attention. If it's something you didn't interact with or don't have an opinion on, maybe you don't want to speak to that. And that's why even instead of our 5-question survey, we try to keep that open text box around question 3. So it's very front-loaded, very easy for the customer to access.
Right. And I see a question here: how easy was it to act on the data once it was structured in the dashboards? Did you see any immediate impact in the business? We'll get to that in 1 second. That's coming up right here. So you've made it easy for people to give feedback. You've given them, the ability to have conversational surveys. You're getting much more responses. This next piece here that was really interesting is paying attention. And what you had mentioned was you just didn't have the tools or systems to do that. It would have taken 3 hours instead of to actually go through the comments from one station.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, no, I was going to say, no, absolutely. The 3 hours to 3 minutes piece, it's two-sided there, right? It's both the work that I had to do to prepare these reports for our field, as well as the work the station managers had to do to read those individual comments. When everything was broken out into individual questions around terminal and terminal employees and bus driver and so forth, that was a ton of work that I had to do to go through and basically compile and pivot all these customer responses, to understand, what are New York's driver situation look like versus Boston's and so forth. So it was a ton of work on my side, but then also on their side, they're reading each individual comment and understanding that, okay, well, I just read through 40. I think the big takeaways here are, seating, their issues with ticketing, and questions around refunds, whatever it may be. It's a ton of time that those station managers don't have to be able to do that. So the 3 minutes piece is always interesting because inside the dashboard, it essentially gives you kind of what are all your top themes for the month, both negative and positive. So what our station managers did immediately when they had this data was identify 3 areas from this feedback that you feel are low-hanging fruits that you could fix immediately. Some of these things that were coming in that were tops were, there's not enough trash cans in the terminal. Well, that's a really easy fix. Let's buy 2 more trash cans and have them in the terminal. Or, this bus is always departing late. No problem. We're going to chat with scheduling to make sure that that bus is scheduled properly and everything's working correctly. There were things that were easy to implement up front that were, low-hanging fruit that took 5 minutes to fix. But it's also, created some nice longer projects. There were some questions around in New York, for example, at the Port Authority, and I know I keep bringing it up. We don't own that terminal. We're in there with, every other bus company that operates out of New York City. One of the places that people were struggling was signage and understanding how to get around the terminal and understanding where Greyhound was within the building. That was a longer project because we have to go to the port and say, can we put signs up here? Can we do this? But it helped us understand that, our customers were having trouble finding out where we were and that we needed to fix that. So it's kind of created almost a project list for all of our station managers, but in a good way because, as these things improve, all of a sudden their conversations with customers on a daily basis improve as well. So that feedback over time as it becomes more and more positive, their jobs on a daily basis are becoming easier because there's less angry customers, there's more, big supporters of Greyhound in the station and so forth. So it all around makes their job on a daily basis much better.
Love it. No, I love it. I love that you brought this time. It's not just station managers' time, but your time as well.
Yep.
So I think it's really, this is something that everybody in customer experience struggles with. We oftentimes don't have, teams to implement the things that we're trying to get done. So every minute saved is really important. What I'd like to go into for a second here is like the really specific, way that we save people time. And this is where we get into technology. So I'll have Alyona speak a little bit about this, but what you're seeing here on the left is just a massive list of comments. These are it's the raw form, it's stuff that people have to read. Versus on the right, how Thematic actually works and the way that we individually notice themes that are in each comment and tag them. Alyona brings an academic background, and I'd love it if you could speak a little bit to kind of how Thematic does this and why this step is kind of so important, why it's actually not as easy to do as a lot of people think.
Yeah, hi everybody, and I'm also reading the questions that are coming in, and this relates somewhat to Joel's question about seeing what the actual results look like. So, and the dashboards as well. So before we go into this, what you can see here is basically a spreadsheet with feedback, which is how Thematic receives the data, and then we pull out themes and sub-themes from every single comment. So instead of putting them into buckets, which is a very traditional way of doing text analytics, what we are doing is we're trying to detect very specific as possible themes in what people are saying. And every single theme has a sentiment attached to it, whether it's positive or negative. And what we also do is we mark up where these themes appear, and we organize themes into a hierarchy. So all of this is done by using algorithms, and I've been working in this field for almost 20 years, and only in the last 3 to 5 years there are deep learning algorithms that have been developed. They actually allow this level of detail and accuracy, and the approach that we chose to take is in its results is most similar to how a person would do it. They would try to discover all of the themes, and they would try to organize the themes before presenting them. But it's just really difficult to do in an Excel spreadsheet, and it doesn't scale to millions of pieces of feedback that a company like Greyhound receives.
So at an individual comment level, Thematic can really quickly find out what are the different themes that are occurring in the different comments. And then we display it in a dashboard format like that. So maybe Alyona, you can speak a little bit to how this works.
Yeah, so there are different types, different parts of our system. And so one of it is Analyst Tools. So Analyst Tools are used by the Insights team to answer specific questions that come back from their teams. For example, what do customers in this from this particular terminal, how do they compare to our best performing terminal, for example? So you can very easily compare two different slices of data, and it's something where you need some analytics skills, and it's not for everybody. So what you can see here is one of the analytical tools, a bar chart that shows at the top level of the themes. If you click on a theme like check-in and boarding, you see the sub-themes, for example, early boarding process. And then if you click on one of these, you see all of the comments, so 24,000, which you can further filter by additional customer attributes and by sentiment as well.
So this really, Matt, maybe if you can speak a little bit to the way that this gives you the tool, the ability to kind of, dig into and answer questions from customer feedback.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to look at it. One piece is from our area. This is a quick dig. If I get a question, from our VP, hey Matt, what's going on with X station? I can clearly jump to this dashboard quickly and understand, what are my themes for the month or whatever period we're looking at? What percentage are positive or negative? And then I can pull some quick verbatims from that just to support that piece. So if we're seeing an uptick in people mentioning drivers are fantastic, what are some specific comments on that? The other piece I like to speak to with this, though, is the station manager side of them looking at this dashboard as well. So all of our station managers have access to that tool. And the big piece for me there is they don't have any formal Excel training, anything like that. They're not analysts on a daily basis. So that dashboard essentially gives them everything in a very easy and understandable format, so that they're able to click through, understand where they can improve, where they're doing well, without having to dig through and try to understand what kind of pivot table we've built out for them or so forth. It's more complicated. It simplifies everything.
So we had a really good question about this from Ignacio about, did we see any immediate impact on the business? How easy was it to act? And I think you kind of answered that. But one of the things I love about your story here, Matt, is that you're not just telling station managers what to do, you're giving them the data in a way that they can digest it and then act on it. Can you maybe give an example of how an individual station manager has taken some of these insights and kind of run with it and brought some results in really without you kind of cajoling them or telling them specifically how to act?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, every one of our station managers has access to this dashboard. They're able to filter down to their specific station to see, themes, scores, responses to their specific station. One great example I always like to give is actually related to our Baltimore station. Our station manager there is always looking to go above and beyond, fix things that he can. So no more than within essentially an hour or two of him having this tool, he had kind of went through and identified essentially 6 areas he thought he could improve. And what was interesting about those 6 was that none of those were metrics that were provided by corporate for him. So areas that corporate thought he could improve. This had actually identified areas that were kind of small and unique just to Baltimore, things that from a grand scale of a full network, we never would have gotten down into the weeds that far. The trash can story I mentioned earlier, he had an issue where that there were not enough trash cans inside of the terminal. It turns out that 2 of them have been taken and I guess disposed of for whatever reason, and customers were frustrated with that. So that was an easy win right there. He saw his NPS for his station jump 2 points when he did that very quickly. The other piece really kind of focuses around our on-time performance and stations that struggle with that a little bit. It helps them understand kind of that idea of what the delay is and how it affects their passengers. A customer in Kansas, for example, reacts very differently to a 30-minute delay for departure than a customer in New York City, for example. So understanding how that affects their customers helped them understand how they needed to react to that. Whether that be they need to go out and, managers need to chat with people and give updates, or do they need to provide snacks to people and so forth. But those were a couple things that were able to kind of help us tailor this system down to the specific station level and help these managers do what they do best, which is, manage and not spend a lot of time digging through a report.
Right. And that's really exciting to see, right? I think it's all about time and leverage, especially in a business as complex as yours. So anytime you can give somebody the tools to start making their own decisions, and the tools to see the results of those decisions, that's the only way I think that most CX programs, given our size relative to the rest of the organization, are going to be successful. So that's awesome to see how you've gotten your station managers on board.
Absolutely, and it's great because all those small wins, they add up to a big win. That's a huge key for us as well.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that big win, because I think the way that you worked, both building your program, building your team, bringing Thematic in to help with that, was starting with these small wins, and then moving as you had those wins up to the executive level. So this is a great segue to this idea of a beachhead metric, sort of a place where we can combine qualitative and quantitative. And I'd love to just hear, maybe, I don't know if we can do it as a poll question. It doesn't look like I'm able to, but I'd be curious, like how many people on this call have had the experience of bringing customer insights to an executive team or a stakeholder, and having those insights, whatever form they might be, dismissed as an anecdote. And as a marketer, I've oftentimes been in that position myself, trying to say, here's what our customers are thinking or feeling or wanting, and it kind of falls on deaf ears for a board or a group that's a little bit more focused on high level numbers. And there's a study that came out in the past few years that talks about how empathy and analytical thinking actually cancel each other out. If we're thinking analytically about numbers and performance, the parts of our brain that would be able to put ourselves in a customer's shoes shut down, and vice versa. So we've talked to people who literally say, hey, I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall trying to get my executive team to see things from the customer's perspective. And what I love about your story, Matt, is that you didn't do that. You actually looked at the numbers that mattered to the executive team. You did your homework to figure out how to kind of prove the value of NPS and some other numbers, really before just bringing in customer data. Can you talk a little bit about that process and the role that NPS or other numbers really play in that conversation with your board?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing for me was really to understand what metric is it that our board is going to value the most, and I think everybody can agree that's revenue, right? If you can provide revenue impact with something, people are going to take notice immediately. So what we did was we started to look at we asked a question about how likely are you to take another trip on Greyhound? It's a 0 to 10. And I wanted to understand, of the customers who scored us a 0, meaning they were not going to come back ever again, how many actually came back? Is this an identifier of churn, of us losing customers? We found that if you give us a 0, less than 5% of those customers ever came back to Greyhound. We looked at a 36-month window, so we gave them 3 years to come back. From there, that grew into a larger story of understanding, well, if they're saying they're not going to come back, then why? We ended up building out a churn survey that took customers who had ridden Greyhound within the past 12 months one time and then not come back, to understand, what was the detractor from taking Greyhound again? Was it you didn't have a need for another trip? Was it you were frustrated with some aspect of service? Was it price? We were able to drive from there to get buy-in to say, look, through customer insights, we're able to identify 8 different reasons why customers don't come back to Greyhound. If we improve these areas, you can expect X% to come back, which is X dollars of additional revenue. As soon as those revenue numbers went up, people took notice immediately. The churn survey was kind of the beginning of that piece, right? And Thematic was a big help with that. We actually sent out a survey to customers who had only ridden us once and not come back. It was actually pretty exciting. We sent out around 1 million surveys. We ended up with over 6% back, which was a great response rate, especially with no incentive, which was fantastic. But anyway, from that and then using their analytics tool, we were able to identify all of the key reasons why folks weren't coming back. From there, that turned into, okay, now then let's see if we can identify what Net Promoter Score, how is that impacting revenue? Is that an indicator of, revenue as we go out over months? So we started running regression models around some stuff. The next piece was on-time performance and understanding customer perceived on-time performance, and how does that impact revenue. So all this data tied back to that beachhead metric, which for us was really revenue. What is the revenue impact of these things? If a customer has a bad experience, how much are we losing and how much do we value each customer?
This is really great to see how you've been able to, rather than just kind of trying to shove, NPS down people's throats or take different reactions from customers, you've really done the homework. Not just to say, hey, NPS matters, HBR says so, but you've calculated and shown that it actually matters within your business. Was that, and it sounds like that was a lengthy and sophisticated process. I mean, you really did your homework on that. It sounds, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was not an easy process. That started with, me sitting there digging through data and getting buy-in from our VP, just here within the commercial group. From there, jumping over to, having finance take a look at everything and making sure everything sounds, good to those guys. From there to, putting together this information inside of a packet to present to, all of our senior managers and above. It just kind of kept growing and growing and growing. And as people took notice, they started to see the value, to the point where that it finally kind of built a cadence over time, right? People wanted to see more of this data and more of this impact. And there became more requests around, we see the numbers from finance, but, what are our customers telling us? Those requests started to come back because they started to see this, these topics more and more and more. Right.
No, great. So with that beachhead metric, I mean, what that's allowed you to do then ultimately is speak stakeholders' language. And I think we've already kind of talked a little bit about that, but I'd love to just, kind of highlight that distinction, right? So a lot of people take customer feedback, kind of compress it into a word cloud, or we talk about sentiment scores. I mean, there are all kinds of things you can do to try to understand color and detail. But what you've been able to do is take that qualitative feedback, people's direct feedback on how their trip has gone, what it's been like for them, and tie that. We're looking here at a word cloud on the left, which but I don't think any CEO has ever made a decision based on a word cloud, versus how Thematic ultimately takes the different themes and shows their impact on the scores that matter. Is there an example that you've could give just of a qualitative theme that's emerged from feedback that maybe wouldn't have gone anywhere, but because you're able to tie it to an actual number, you've been able to count. That's something we do here, Matt, we can talk about in a bit, but how has been showing that impact allowed you to drive action from it?
Yeah, one of the big spots that we saw that with was Wi-Fi. So we offer Wi-Fi on all of our buses, and the general thought was, if Wi-Fi doesn't work on a bus, it's a huge detractor. If the Wi-Fi does work, it's fantastic and everyone's thrilled the entire trip. Just through kind of understanding this qualitative feedback, we found that when the Wi-Fi didn't work, customers didn't even mention it. It wasn't a detractor to their trip. It had no effect on their NPS score. They saw Wi-Fi as a value add, which was something that we had not really thought of before. We thought, well, they're seeing this when they buy their ticket, they expect it to work, just like on an airplane, if they're at their house, whatever it may be. In this case, our customers, it wasn't a detractor if it didn't work. So that was huge for us to understand that, Wi-Fi is a great value add, but if it's not working, it's not the end all be all of a trip. If somebody scores us a 3 on NPS and their Wi-Fi didn't work, there's more than likely another reason why they're giving us a 3, and it's not the Wi-Fi. That was a huge finding for us, and just helped us kind of understand how that we value these add-on projects that we do to help enhance the customer experience on board the bus.
Awesome. Yeah. So being able to bring those insights, but show not just that there's volume and people are talking about it, but show that it's impacting scores that we've established, really matter to the business.
Yes.
This last kind of step here really is this idea of building a cadence with stakeholders. And you've spoken a little bit to that so far. Really love the way that you've kind of fed your executive team results, fed them data, kind of built the case for paying attention to the customer experience. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of what was the level of involvement of the executive team and the level of attention they paid to the customer experience? What did the reports look like when you started, and what are your updates and discussions and conversations look like with the executive team now?
Absolutely, that's a great question. When I started here, Net Promoter Score was reported out generally bi-monthly, every 2 months. It received one page in the back of an index of a manager's review deck. So you can imagine that was not looked at very often. Over time, as we understood, there's value here, and we started to get that buy-in. Now then, we've actually put together it's a 6-slide presentation that's part of a monthly senior directors and above review that walks through the full customer journey and the impact of customer experience on each piece of that. We review everything from how was the purchase experience? Was mobile app strong this month? Was our website strong? To on-bus experience. What are we seeing inside of our surveys, as well as what are we hearing from our call center? All the way through to post-purchase. When people are complaining, how are we handling that? Do they feel we're doing a good job? So it went from, an afterthought in the back of a deck to being a significant portion of a monthly review process that includes, key stakeholders here at Greyhound, because they understand that if customers are happy, they come back and they spend money again.
Awesome. So a quick question that's come up here is how do you tie customer feedback into churn, and what
Sure.
identifier is used in the survey to link feedback with spending?
Yeah, so it takes a couple sets of data, really, to be honest. A lot of the return, not return, was actually based on transactional data. So this was more tying together several systems to kind of understand. Then we utilized a brand new survey to ask those customers if they did not come back to Greyhound, why didn't they come back? So it was really kind of understanding, from a transactional perspective, when was the last time we saw you transact? And if you didn't come back, then we were able to, identify your email, send you a survey. And then that survey walked through a few questions around, when was the last time you traveled with Greyhound? Have you taken a trip with someone considered to be a competitor where Greyhound could have been an option and they were not? And if they said they did take one, then we're going to ask them the question, why wasn't Greyhound considered? And that's where people started kind of, spilling all their info around, well, your price was $12 higher, or I didn't really like this fee that you charged, or, I didn't, the last time I rode, my driver was rude, whatever it may be. That's where we started to find out all that insight, and we were able to break it out to say that, on a customer base, we understand that X% of our customers don't come back. And now we can break it out by these survey responses, which we felt were a strong sample of our entire whole.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to see how you've been able to connect those dots. And one thing I'd love to call attention to is just the way that this has been an ongoing conversation with your executive team. on this slide, what we're looking at is one of the impact charts from Thematic. So, we really want to empower people to be, not just focused on one-time surveys and one-time reports, but seeing how do things change over time. So one of the things we're proud of in our technology is the ability to look at 2 points in time, look at it change, and then with unstructured feedback, uncover the drivers of what's made a score go up or what's made a score go down over time. And also some of the interesting things, like you mentioned, kind of with Wi-Fi, for instance. Maybe it matters, but only matters in certain cases or certain examples. Can you, I guess, give an example of some of the investments that you've been able to, get buy-in for that wouldn't have been possible had you not been aggregating this type of feedback and this type of customer data?
Absolutely. I think the biggest one that's a driver for us is new bus purchases. For several years, our ownership group was, not really big on buying new buses. Our buses, although they were getting a little bit older, they were still able to maintain them. They were performing relatively well. They were in service more than out of service, and they were meeting kind of all the standard guidelines. What we were able to provide from a customer insights perspective was a complaint basis around the age of your bus, and understanding that a bus that's 15 years old, what was the net promoter score of a customer on that bus, and what did they talk about? Did they talk about the age of that bus versus a bus that was 2 years old, 3 years old, and so on? We broke this down by model and by age, and we're able to help create this business case to say, look, we understand these buses are still running well, but people don't like them. They're old, beat up, they don't have the technology they want to see, and so forth. And that became a massive driver behind this investment in new buses, which was successful. It went all the way up through, like I said, to our ownership company, and we've been purchasing buses based on that feedback.
So you've been able, by using data, not only to get individual station managers focused on and taking action individually on customer feedback. You've sustained a conversation at the board level, but you've also used customer feedback to secure CapEx investments that wouldn't have been really on the table otherwise, which I think is just huge for somebody in a customer experience and analytics role. We had a question here. Can you explain how AI was useful in asking the customer the right question? That was a question from Osama.
Yeah, that's a great question. AI for us, actually, in my opinion, removed the requirement that we ask the question. I think about when I take a trip, trip on the bus. By the time I've gotten off, in my head, I've got 2 or 3 things that I think were really good and 2 or 3 things that were really bad. I think that AI really allowed us to no longer have to ask those questions, and by being able to work with that open text box, that customer can give us those 6 items that they enjoyed or didn't like, and then AI is able to break it down for us and make it consumable quickly. So we're no longer having to sit here and kind of dream up what questions we want to ask about what specific parts of the journey that were a problem or were positive. Customers bring those up. And, like I mentioned earlier, sure, that doesn't get rid of, demographics questions or other, long tail study that you may want to do. But this really helps you not have to think on a daily basis about what you're asking your customer, what's positive, what's negative, and so forth. They're able to answer those questions for you without having to ask it.
Great. I hear new things every time we talk about, what you're doing, with our tools and with your resources and your team there. So great work. Before we go to some other questions, I'd love to hear just in your words, for somebody who's starting out and who hasn't gotten that level of executive buy-in, doesn't have people focused on the customer, has a sense of what's possible, but really is kind of just getting started building their program. What tips or pieces of advice or mindsets, what would you advise or suggest people think to get started?
Yeah, I think there's 2 big things. The first one we talked about pretty extensively. That's the beachhead metric. Make your data valuable and relevant to people who you want to sway. right? So if you're trying to get buy-in from operations about customer insights and the value in improving the overall experience, see if you can tie some of your data to some of the most important metrics that operations works with. Work to see how that you can help support cases or even decline cases that they're bringing forward for new technologies or new purchases or whatever it may be. But figure out a way to get your data involved in that and support, and I guarantee you they're going to latch on immediately. And the second piece really is that, starting at the kind of base level. In my opinion, our station managers are some of our, most valued employees. And to be able to influence them early on and provide something that makes their lives easier, create a quick buy-in. Anytime you tell somebody you're going to make their job easier, they're going to be willing to listen. So getting them to see this tool, firsthand and understand how that it could impact them on a daily basis made it a really easy way to say, look, if you identify these 2 or 3 things that are wrong in here and work on them, your scores are going to increase. So that buy up from the bottom end and just kind of keep stair-stepping up over time was really integral into getting us to where we are today.
Awesome. Great answer. Here's a question that's come in that maybe Alyona and Matt could both speak to. But the question is, text analytics is not new. There are a lot of big established vendors. Why did you pick a small startup like Thematic?
Yeah, so if it's okay, I'll go first on that one. So we looked at a lot of the big guys as well when we looked at Thematic. And the most important part for us was the ability to customize and attention to detail. When we started with Thematic back in 2016, they were a pretty new company. And one of the things that they offered us immediately, other than, of course, fantastic pricing, was the ability to customize and really work around the metrics we're using to create what we needed to see. Transportation is very different, as a lot of people know. With the metrics that we look at, with the feedback that we get from people, it's product oriented, but it's not so much a physical product that you're holding in your hand. They were happy to help us build individual dashboards. They were happy to help us with additional training for some of our staff. They really worked, daily to make sure that we were happy with every aspect of that tool. And it's become very, very integral over the years. But they're always available. It's a small staff, and that was what was key to us, was that customization.
So that's a really great to hear, something we love being able to both offer and do for our customers. What I'll say before I pass it over to Alyona is that, a lot of the established solutions out there are very, very human centric. They take a lot of people to run, which really makes you wonder how much work is the AI doing versus, people and rules. And having technology that works this way allows us to offer that level of customization. Alyona, would you have any other thoughts on kind of what differentiates Thematic from some of the bigger, more established text analytics solutions?
I think what I've noticed coming from natural language processing is that a lot of the time companies start with technology and kind of serve to people what's possible instead of listening to customer needs and understanding what questions are you actually wanting to answer given all of this customer feedback. And this is how we approach this. And there are some critical decisions we made about not just putting things into buckets, but picking up as many things as possible, organizing them in a way that helps you answer your questions quicker. There are kind of these 2 parts, both the text analytics itself, but also visualizations that are so easy to use that whether you're the CEO or frontline staff, you can very quickly find what you need in this data.
Excellent.
Would love to have a separate conversation. Thank you so much for everybody who joined today, and please feel free to reach out to me directly or on alyona@getthematic.com, or as well to Matt and Steven.
Great. Well, thank you all. It's been a really, really wonderful conversation, Matt. I'll pass things back over to the folks at CXPA if there's anything else you'd like to address.
I think we're all set, guys. Thanks so much for listening in.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Thanks everyone who joined us today. We hope you enjoyed hearing from Matt from Greyhound and Alyona and Steven from Thematic. Hopefully you're walking away with some fresh new ideas and insights today. As a reminder, we have recorded this webinar, and the recording will be posted in the public resources section of our website. If we were not able to get to your question, we will formulate the answers and post the answers along with the recording on our website. And if you are a CCXP, your CEU for attending this webinar will be added to your account within 1 week. So I'd like to again thank our speakers from Greyhound and Thematic, and I'd also like to mention our appreciation for Thematic for their sponsorship of the CXPA. Hope you have a great rest of your day.